Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a Ukraine War News Update for the 7th of May 2023. Let's get to where we normally start. The Ukrainian General Staff released figures for the Russian losses for the day before, indicatively useful I find, and I think we can see some really consolidated trends working themselves out here. So 660 liquidated personnel. That is where it has been. A little bit of up and down there, but starting to see it creep back up a little bit from the 400 and 500 marks to the mid 600s. 6 tanks, 10 APCs. Again, fairly high on the APC level. 6 tanks is also pretty useful for the Ukrainians, and then this is where it starts getting interesting, and this is where we see the trends continue. 18 artillery systems and 2 MLRS multiple launch rocket systems. That is a high number. Yet again, the Russians are losing umpteen numbers of artillery pieces on a daily basis. I mean, if you think over the last couple of weeks, you're going into what must be somewhere near over 100 pieces of artillery lost. 18 drones, 16 vehicles and fuel tanks, another heavy day for those, and then 5 pieces of special equipment. Again, I keep saying the average is less than 1 a day. To see 5 in a day is very significant. It means, well, it indicates to me at any rate that this is something they are explicitly aiming for ahead of a counter-offensive. Also very useful anyway. What are pieces of special equipment? They could be radar installations, they could be electronic warfare systems, surveillance systems. Indeed, I'm going to show you a piece of footage of one such installation being taken out. This is a kamikaze FPV, first-person view drone footage. Kamikaze drone hitting a Russian Muron P surveillance station in the occupied part of Kherson. Just basically a big mast with a bunch of stuff on, doing its surveillance. I can't tell you exactly what that is without looking into it, but this is, I would assume, one of the pieces of equipment that is included in the 5 pieces of special equipment taken out yesterday, and that helps to blind the Russians in terms of their defensive capabilities, but also offensive capabilities as well. Sticking to the Kherson area, we have Ukrainians hitting and destroying a large base of Russian forces in Holopristan, near the Dnipro River. In fact, there's a couple of hits around Kherson. I've just arbitrarily kind of picked that one because it's quite a major one by the looks of it, but there have been a few. Now, one of the big pieces of news in the hits and losses section, the video does show the destruction of the car of Russian ultranationalist writer and former State Duma member Zakhar Prilepin. After a reported IED, improvised explosive device, went off, his driver was killed and he was reportedly wounded. He reportedly fought in the Donbass before the 2022 invasion. Just to let you know that his car looks in a pretty bad way. So if you look at the car there, I mean, he is apparently wounded, apparently in a stable but critical condition in hospital. That looks like that would have hurt. Now, who is he? I actually featured him on a video I did on explicitly the use of religion by propagandists, and he was the his video monologue was the opening stimulus I used for that video, and it was pretty horrendous. It was horrible, and that's who he is. So you might remember him from there. He's an ultra nationalist propagandist, comes out with some pretty I mean, goodness me, you might call it standard propagandist fare these days, but it is, very distasteful, and likes to use a lot of religious rhetoric in his sort of monologues and the claims he makes. So he has been taken out, at least, for the time being, and that is another hit on another. Again, is it? I don't know whether you call it partisan activity or collaborators or whatever word you want to use for it. This is stuff that's happening within the Russian borders that is aiding the Ukrainian military cause. Who has done it? Who is responsible? There are loads of suppositions flying around, of course. Now, Russia's air defense has taken down 2 ballistic missiles in occupied Crimea. The head of the Russian annexed Crimean Peninsula said yesterday, These were Hrim 2. These are the Thunder 2 missiles. Um, Crimea was the site of a lot of activity yesterday and last night. Apparently, Zhankoy helicopter base in occupied Crimea was hit some hours ago too. So Zhankoy is up further up north there. It's not that yellow box there. Latter stages of shaping operations. Sure sounds like the counterattack is imminent. It could be the early stages, to be honest. I'm not sure it is the latter stages. There are some saying that, and we'll come on to this a little bit later, that the counterattack might happen in June. But yeah, basically, occupied Crimea. This is the information that ours did hit the military airfield in Sarabuz near Simferopol with a missile. However, it's not yet known exactly what could have been damaged. And this was one of many hits last night in Crimea and yesterday. It's reported that 10 drones, I've heard that maybe a dozen drones attacked Crimea last night. This allegedly is Yevpatoria. The Russian appointed governor reported that all drones were downed, of course. So that's naturally what they're going to say. How much damage was done in Crimea, I don't know, but it's very important to note that it is being targeted very consistently at the moment, Crimea, and quite a bit as well. There appeared to be, like last night, here's a list of places that Andrew Perpetua has got hold of that were hit all around the same sort of time. 4:15, Saki, there's an airbase there. 4:19, Yevpatoria. 4:22, Sevastopol. 4:29, Novofedorivka. 4:35, Kozacha Bay. 4:39, Sevastopol again. 5:04, Krasnoperkopsk. Explosions, air defense, anti-aircraft defense, all sorts of stuff going on. I again don't know what the damage is, whether everything was shot down or not, but the Crimea is being shaped, it looks like. Russian sources report that there's a massive Ukrainian drone attack on the southwestern coast of Russian-occupied Crimea, from Saki down to Cape Fiolent, south of Sevastopol. The area is full of Russian military bases and installations. Well, you've heard Zhankoy being hit, you've heard of places around here being hit, in the middle being hit. So you have Pretoria there, just north of that area. So pretty much everywhere being struck in some way. On the other hand, the Russians have hit Balaklia. If you remember Balaklia, do I have my war map and map? Yes, I do. So Balaklia was the crossing that the Russians failed several times to do successfully, and they lost upwards of 100 pieces of equipment there. It was an absolute disaster. I think they tried 3 crossings and got hammered every single time. Well, that's now been hit by S-300s last night, so that is some Russian activity there. So 5 were injured in a Russian attack there with S-300s. We have had, what do we have here? Nikopol and Mahanets get hit super often. They are down near Zaporizhia. Nikopol, Mahanets, heavy shelling there. Usual sort of stuff. I mean, it's sad to say usual. I mean, it's pretty devastating, isn't it? And then we had news yesterday of 6 demining experts being killed in Kherson. The employees of the state emergency service came under fire near the city. 2 more people, including a female paramedic, were injured. That's a really big loss. I mean, these guys have got expertise in demining. That's so important for Ukraine going forward. It's going to take decades for Ukraine to clear themselves of all the mines that have been thrown around by both sides, obviously, and it's a real loss to them that in one fell swoop 6 were taken out by Russian shelling. I believe it was shelling. So moving to Russia on fire. Here we've got St. Petersburg. These photos are from the second biggest city there, St. Petersburg. Something's ablaze in a Gorlovo industrial zone near the Volkonoskoye highway, says Tim White. We have continued fires in the Sverdlovsk region. Many villages remain at risk. Pretty apocalyptic scenes there, apparently. Those fires have been going for days. It's been absolutely terrible. I think there have been 2, is it say here as well? Yeah. So this is Pervomoskoye in Sverdlovsk Oblast in Russia. 2 gunpowder warehouses are on fire. 18 more are under fire threat. Evacuation of 400 local residents has been announced. It's just really apocalyptic scenes from there. Absolutely horrific. Now, is that to do with the war? No, not as a result of the war, probably. But as I've said a number of times, the usual job of Russian conscripts is to be on sort of fire service and to either prepare the ground so there are fire breaks and these kind of fires don't spread so badly, or to deal with them once they break out. And they are not able to do that for this year and last year so effectively, because they're being trained for the front line and being sent to, to do their military stuff rather than to do their kind of fire emergency stuff. So you will see a lot more of this activity over this summer, and no doubt, going forward. So moving on to bits and pieces, military news, all sorts of stuff. Prigozhin has published a report to Shoigu. So Shoigu is the defense minister. Prigozhin, he has his own PMCs, private military companies. Prigozhin is in charge of Wagner PMC, private military company, and they are operating Bakhmut. They are now being supported by Russian conventional forces in the area, the VDV, the paratroopers, airborne forces, the DNR or DPR, Donetsk People's Republic forces, more like militia around there, and other conventional forces, as well as other PMCs, Redout, the Gazprom PMCs, all these other mercenary companies that are now sort of in this melange, this big mix that is Bakhmut as far as the Russian forces are concerned. Prigozhin has claimed that he's going to pull his troops out by the 10th of May because he's not getting given enough ammunition. He's unable to recruit in the prisons, so on and so forth. And actually, it looks like Wagner properly culminated. There are all these different rumors flying around that the Kadyrovites, so the Chechens, are going to come in. He's done a deal with Ramzan Kadyrov that the Chechens are coming to replace the Wagner PMC in Bakhmut. Then there are rumors that they're not replacing, they are supporting them, and so on and so forth. And all these kind of rumors are kicking around. Will he? Won't he? Will the Wagner leave? So on and so forth. So here it says Wagner mercenaries in Bakhmut to be replaced by Kadyrovites. Russia's Wagner group will pull out its forces on 10th of May and hand over positions to the Chechen leader Kadyrov and his troops. Will that happen? We'll see. Lots of rumors flying around. Now, moving on. Scott Ritter. I've done a few videos explicitly on Scott Ritter. I mean, if you didn't think he was a Russian shill and fully in a payment of the Kremlin before, you've surely got to now. I mean, this guy is discredited. Anyone that takes this guy seriously needs to jog on, because he is basically a mouthpiece for the Kremlin. He's married to a Georgian Russian, isn't he? Or Georgian, but and he's got connections. He's been a contributor to RT before, Russia Today, and it comes out with, he just parrots a pro-Kremlin narrative, and people are saying, "Oh, look at this! He's an American and therefore this is all true because of who he is," and blah blah blah. And you're like, no. This is a Kremlin mouthpiece. Anyway, he's been in Russia. So Komsomolskaya Pravda published Scott Ritter's book, and he showed up at a book signing in St. Petersburg, predicting that Russia wins by this summer, and wondering whether Russia and China can ever forgive the US for everything we've done. I mean, goodness gracious me. Let's just, I'm not going to go into it, but you can, I mean, here is Scott Ritter with his books in Russian, parroting, saying everything that this Russian audience wants to hear. And you don't need to take this guy seriously ever again. That's the end of that. He's just absolutely got no credibility. Okay. Expectations from the counteroffensive of the armed forces of Ukraine may be overestimated in the world. Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov stated this in an interview with the Washington Post. So, be careful about being too excited and having your expectations far too high for the counteroffensive. I swing from high to low, and I don't really know what. Well, more recently, I've been more upbeat about the counteroffensive, but I also need to temper that with some skepticism and caution as well, just because I need to manage my own expectations. And I guess this is what this article is setting out to do, as in this is probably what Reznikov is setting out to do, manage expectations so that if they under-deliver everyone's like, well, we kind of knew that would happen, rather than being super disappointed and go, well, there's no point supporting you so much anymore. You haven't done very well with all the stuff we've given you, etc., etc. So you got to manage those expectations. He said, but I can't tell you what the scale of the success will be. 10 kilometers, 30 kilometers, 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, said Reznikov. During the expected counteroffensive, he would consider the deoccupation of any Ukrainian territory a success. The head of the Ministry of Defense revealed that according to the plan, the offensive will allow not only to liberate villages and cities, but also to cut the logistical and technical chains of the Russian army and reduce their offensive capability. Absolutely all the stuff I've been talking about previously. Meanwhile, President Zelensky said in an interview with Washington Post that Ukrainian soldiers will be ready for the counteroffensive when Ukraine receives all the weapons agreed with its allies. In particular, the terms may also depend on weather conditions. This is why I always said it's going to happen the end of May, but I wouldn't be surprised if it gets pushed back even later than that, where you're starting to see Leopard 1 tanks being readied in June, and you'll need the logistical trails for those as well. That they will be super useful for supporting any counteroffensive move. So there's still, as you can imagine, still equipment being drafted into Ukraine, and all the activity that goes around is not just the pieces of equipment, it's about the maintenance, the spare parts, the expertise for people being trained to fix these bits of equipment. Some of these bits of equipment, if we go back to the Leopard 1s, the expertise has kind of gone. They've had to get people out of retirement in Germany and other places to start training the Ukrainians on the Leopard 1s, and that means also training them on how to support the Leopard 1s, etc., etc. So there we have. Washington Post says Ukrainian officials fear upcoming counteroffensive may not live up to expectations. Top Ukrainian officials fear that the much anticipated Ukrainian offensive that is expected to turn the tide of the war may not live up to expectations, the Washington Post reported, citing interviews with senior Ukrainian officials. Okay, moving on. Mayor of temporarily occupied Melitopol. So Melitopol is slap bang in the middle of the south, and one of the major targets, as according to most analysts, in the counteroffensive. Reports that there are huge queues on the road from Melitopol to Crimea. According to him, the military passed through the Chonhar checkpoint outside the queue, and the rest at least 5 hours of waiting. So to go back to the map, this is to say that Melitopol, lots of queues of people trying to get out and down to Crimea through the Chonhar Peninsula. This is the isthmus. That is the crossing there. There's a bridge as well there, and that signifies that the Russians are, I guess, resigned to the fact, or to the, I don't know if it's a fact, resigned to the idea that the Ukrainians are going to be attacking through or past Melitopol. In Melitopol, the enemies are burning sacks of documents in a panic, at least one source is claiming. In fact, I've seen this in several places. The invaders clean up after themselves. Documents were burned in sacks all day in the building of the occupation military police. Also, the equipment of the passports, I've heard that the passport office is closed there, is hurriedly packed and taken to the Russian Federation. In the evening, there was an urgent meeting of the leadership of the Melitopol Intensive Care Hospital, where they discussed who had already managed to escape. Lots of talk about Melitopol then, and activity around there that indicates what the Russians are thinking of the area, and what the thinking about what the Ukrainians will do as far as the counteroffensive is concerned. Right. Going on to military aid and training and all bits and pieces concerning the Ukrainian military and Russian military. Ukrainian Bradley IFZs, infantry fighting vehicles, IFVs, with Ukrainian troops are on the move in Ukraine. The counteroffensive likely to begin soon. I would say soon would be sometime in the next month or so. But it wouldn't surprise me if it did happen in a week's time. But it also wouldn't surprise me if it happened in 6 weeks' time. So you are starting to see these vehicles now in Ukraine rather than on the training grounds in Poland and Germany. As expected, says Thomas Tyner, the Ukrainians are dispersing Western vehicles among a whole bunch of brigades, i.e. those 109 Bradleys aren't going to be just one brigade. The same dispersion applies to Leopard 2 tanks. This gives each brigade an armoured fist to smite Russian counterattacks. He gave an open source intelligence overview of all of the brigades and the makeup, and they didn't really have, if I remember correctly, didn't really have the Leopard 2s in that brigade infographic. So it could be that those Leopard 2s are being put, as he says here, and Bradleys, many Bradleys as well, or some Bradleys being put in all of the brigades rather than having entire brigades of just Bradleys and just Leopard 2s. But correct me if I'm wrong, that's how I remember it and what he's saying there. They're training as well. The Ukrainians are also training on equipment recently delivered from private sources rather than from government agencies. These are Ukrainian soldiers training with a recently delivered British FV432 APC. Some decommissioned APCs of this type were privately purchased by volunteers, along with an unknown amount of bulldogs pledged to be donated to Ukraine by the UK. And again, we're starting to see some of these in Ukraine. We know that some of the private ones have been delivered already and are being then fitted up in Ukraine, ready to be used. I don't know about the bulldogs from the UK, from the actual armed forces in the UK. I haven't seen those yet. Are they still in the UK? Are they on the way? Yeah, I'm not sure. I've talked a lot about how every SPG, self-propelled gun, self-propelled mortar, air defense system needs to have anti loitering munition screens, right? They need to have these wire nettings up to protect from lancers. Lancers are a right problem, and now you're starting to see images that suggest that they do have these in place. Here we've got wire netting, just chicken wire or normal kind of fencing that is camouflage, so that's pretty decent camouflage anyway. But you're starting to see a lot more of this stuff, which should be absolute necessity on every piece of kit. You shouldn't be able to drive around without having access to this stuff. As soon as you park up, you get that stuff up. Toot sweet. Okay, we are also seeing Hydra 70 launchers. Hydra 70s are originally air to ground munitions. Okay, that's how they were designed. Sort of unguided rockets you just fire out of helicopters and whatnot. And then they've been adapted in several ways. The particular adaptation we are seeing in Ukraine are the APKWS, Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System, which I think are BAE, British Aerospace Engineering, adaptations of those unguided rockets. And these are, if we go down, so Ukraine is being supplied with APKWS rockets following the war as part of the aid package announced by the US in August 2022. The L3 Harris Vehicle Agnostic Modular Palletized ISR Rocket Equipment, Vampire. This is where they I want to call this Vampire. What words can we come up with that make the word Vampire that can be vaguely to do with rockets and stuff? I know, how about vehicle agnostic? So it doesn't matter what vehicle you use them on because they are modular and palletized, so we can just whack them on the back of anything. ISR rocket equipment. Yep, okay, we'll forget the S and R, we just have the I bit of that, and their rocket equipment. Yep, Vampire. Brilliant, job done. System will be sent to Ukraine. The system consists of a sensor ball and a 4-barreled APKWS rocket launcher that can be mounted on trucks, while it can direct laser-guided rockets on ground targets. The Pentagon specified it is a counter-UAS. So I said it was hitting drones the other day, and someone said it is not. It's not. It's for ground attacks, and I was like, no, literally, there is evidence of it being fired for this, and it can be. I think it can be used for both. So hence the confusion. So these can be used ground to ground and ground to air. They've got like a 1 to 5 kilometer range. But there you go. 14 kits will be installed on vehicles that the US provides to Ukraine, and 4 systems will be delivered by mid-2023, 10 more by the end of the year. They've already got those, or they've already got at least some of those. So yeah, and here is evidence of one. There you go. That's the back of a truck. It looks like a Humvee variant there. That's a Hydra 70. And then Finally, in private conversations, Shoigu, so this again, the defense minister, has professed a willingness to dig in for the long haul, vowing to carry out more mobilizations if necessary, and emphasizing Russia is capable of conscripting as many as 25 million fighting age men, a senior European official said. This is in the New York Times. Now, I find this quite revealing in many ways. Also quite problematic for the Russians, and we're going to talk about that in a second, because they are already struggling to get men to do the jobs in the economy that they would need to have a fully functioning economy. So the economy is going to be struggling, and they're in that state already, and then to say, well, we can mobilize 25 million men is just kind of pie in the sky. Yet, I suppose potentially, in theory, you could. In reality, as soon as you announce a mobilization, half of those would be running off because they don't want to die, because that's kind of how people feel often. It's like you don't wake up thinking, yeah, I wouldn't mind having a job where I've got a 30% chance of dying in a month or whatever. So people aren't going to be wanting to go to those front lines. So you see people escape Russia again, and I don't know that they can. You can dig in for the long haul, but if you can't bring equipment to bear, if you're losing these huge numbers of equipment on a daily basis, what are you replacing them with? And is it just going to, in a year's time, you can say, yeah, we can dig in for the long haul. So in a year's time, you've just got poorly equipped men running around in fields getting hammered by equipment that NATO is still providing to Ukraine. So I think Russia is in a fairly desperate position. It's interesting seeing, like, I sometimes drop into other mappers. I did that this morning, and looking at some of these other, I won't name names, but other prominent mappers who have just become more and more pro-Russian. And then you look at, and they've got huge followings, far more than I do. And they have, not that means anything, but you go through the comments and it's like 95% bot comments, or like just half of Russia must be employed to just go on and splurge the comment threads. And just if you were to live in that echo space, and I don't, my area might be its own echo chamber, right, as well, so I understand that, and yeah, but this is the other side's echo chamber. But if you just pay attention to those ideas, you would think that Russia is this glorious empire that's just about to absolutely slaughter Ukraine, and it's just a complete mischaracterization of what is going on. It's just quite funny to dip into those places sometimes. Funny, sad. Okay, geopolitical stuff. Turns out that a bunch of really important people came to London yesterday to see how well Charlie's new hat fits. Turns out to fit quite nicely, I guess. What was particularly nice about this, and as the Euromaidan press, I don't know if this was intentional or not. I like to think it is. I think it probably is. That's a really overt colour scheme going on there. Looking down there, you got the blue and the yellow along the floor, very blue, very yellow. Ukrainian colours were at the heart of the Westminster Abbey during coronation of King Charles III. Buckingham Palace called the colour choice no more than a happy coincidence. But US First Lady Jill Biden and her granddaughter Finnegan Biden wore the Ukrainian colours too. So coincidence or not, let's have a look at some of these pictures. Yeah, definitely looks like they're making a statement there. And remember, Vladimir Putin was not invited. Of course, he wouldn't have come anyway. And there you get blue and yellow as well. Just, I love this. I love this. The I'd say subtlety. I don't think it's particularly subtle, but it's a statement, isn't it? And it's a statement in the right place. In fact, look, I've just got, it's giving me goosebumps. I kind of like this stuff. I'm no big monarchist or anything, so it's not so much the whole pageantry of that, although I suppose if lots of people get off on that, that's cool, and if it gives you a sense of identity and it's positive, yeah, good stuff. But in order to do that and make a statement, yeah, I'm liking that. So evening address of the president. President Zelensky says today the head of the government of Ukraine and the First Lady of Ukraine represent our state in the United Kingdom, where the coronation of King Charles III and Queen Camilla took place. Now, I was thinking about this. This was quite clever. I think if Zelensky had gone there himself, it would have been quite dangerous, like for other people, and there would have been security concerns. But also, it would have been more about him. And I think for him to send is it Shimal, the prime minister, and his wife, I think that's great because Ukraine are there. You've got the Ukraine colours there. He's making a statement, and he's got. I think that's a perfect way of managing that. Whereas if he had gone, there would have been too much conversation. It would have been distracting for Charles and the whole thing of the coronation. So I think that's been well played. Um, Right, Moldova, Ukraine's neighbouring country, is considering joining an EU ban on Ukrainian grain imports. I don't know if that's an EU ban. That's a ban on certain countries in the EU. The Agriculture Minister of Moldova, Vladimir Bolea, says in response to the restrictions, Ukraine is preparing to ban Moldovan imports. Oh dear. This is where things could go south. You don't want this sort of stuff happening. You need to work out a solution for this grain issue so that grain is getting out to the rest of the world. The EU's grain is somehow protected. That gives the farmers in the EU, their livelihoods and etc. etc. And everyone's happy. You want everyone to be happy. You don't want this division between allies that's taking place as a result of something not really related to the war directly, but more in terms of the economics. And I said I'll talk about this earlier. This is the UK Defence Intelligence released today, intelligence update. It says Russia is almost certainly facing its worst labour shortage in decades. The Russian central bank surveyed 14,000 employees and found that the number of available employees was at its lowest level since 1998. Over the last 3 years, Russia's population has reportedly decreased by 2 million more people than expected due to the impacts of COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine. Russia saw up to 1.3 million people leave the country in 2022, including many younger and well-educated people in high-value industries. The Russian Ministry of Communications said that about 10% or 100,000 of the IT workforce left the country in 2022 and did not return. Mobilization, historically higher emigration, and an aging and shrinking population is limiting the labour supply. This will likely lead to a reduction in the potential growth of the Russian economy and risks stoking inflation. This is incredibly important. I mean, Russia absolutely has to have a functioning economy to sustain a long-haul war effort. Obviously, they've got the hydrocarbons they can rely on, and that's the largest component of their economy, but they need to function all across the board. As soon as, I think news like this and analysis like this just goes to show what a difficult predicament Russia have found themselves in, all of their own making, of course. What remains to be seen is whether the population will feel the brunt of the war efforts. Obviously, many of them have, in terms of like not existing anymore, dying as a result of that. But in terms of their standard of living, the quality of their life, all these kind of metrics of societies functioning healthily, I wonder whether there'll be a point where the Russian people will say, no, we've had enough of this, or whether there is enough of a control over the Russian population in terms of propaganda and PR and state TV and narratives supplied by the Kremlin and the control of the internal security services have. Remember, there are more members of the internal security services than there are of the armed forces. So Russia has traditionally had a very strong control over its population. Anyway, thanks for that. That's the news update for today. If you want to help out the channel, that'd be amazing. You can pop along to uasupporter.com/ATP, and a /ATP helps out my channel, so I get a little bit of commission on anything. This is in collaboration with Reporting from Ukraine. So if you want to take a look at the beanies, lots of options for beanies, mugs, I don't know, all sorts of stuff. Pop along to uasupporter.com/ATP. Anyway, thanks so much for your support. Really appreciate it. And take care. Thanks so much as well to the members especially those who have upgraded their membership. Particular appreciation to Mark Raven, Da Vinci, and Mats Larson, legends. Really, really thank you so much. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.